The silence of the Velatris Nebula was the Compact's greatest achievement, a carefully curated tranquility that had cost millennia of diplomacy and, when required, decisive, sterilizing force. Prefect Valerius stood on the observation deck of the luminous Mandate, his flagship, and watched the swirling clouds of incandescent hydrogen drift by like lazy celestial rivers. The view was a testament to order. For 10,000 years, the Cygnian Compact had governed this spiral arm of the galaxy, binding hundreds of species under the Great Accord, a doctrine that traded the chaos of unbridled technological advancement for peace and stability. They had outlawed self-replicating technologies, forbidden research into dimensional engineering, and placed inviolable caps on energy generation. These were not suggestions. They were the physical laws of their civilization, enforced by the Harmonious Fleet, a navy whose purpose was not conquest, but the gentle, inexorable correction of divergence. Valerius was a product of this peace, his thoughts as orderly as the fleet formations he commanded, his anatomy, a delicate fusion of biological grace and crystalline cybernetics, was designed for logic and longevity, not passion. He felt a cool satisfaction as the 300 ships of his patrol group moved in perfect, synchronized orbits, their silver hulls reflecting the nebula's soft light. They were shepherds watching over a placid flock, and the galaxy had never been safer. The first sign of disruption was not an alarm or a visual contact, but a feeling, a subtle wrongness that prickled at the edge of his consciousness. It was a dissonant chord in the symphony of space-time, a tremor in the very fabric of causality that his implants struggled to process. On the bridge, Sensor Regent Lyra, whose 6 optical sensors could perceive the quantum foam, recoiled from her console. "Prefect," she reported, her voice losing its composed, melodic tone for the first time in Valerius's memory. "There is an event in the heart of the nebula." An event was a sterile term for what was unfolding on the main holographic display. It was not a ship emerging from a jump point or a wormhole tearing open. Reality itself was being peeled back. The vacuum of space stretched thin like heated glass until it became transparent, revealing something else beneath. A shape began to resolve, a form that did not so much enter their space as it asserted its own. It was vast, impossibly so, a spindle of pearlescent material that seemed to drink the nebula's light, its surface swirling with patterns that were not reflections but living ecosystems of energy. It possessed no discernible engines, no weapon emplacements, no viewports, just a smooth, unbroken hull that felt more like a geological formation than a piece of technology. The ship, if it could be called that, was a monument to every law the Compact had ever created, a violation on a scale so profound it bordered on theological. The energy readings were nonsensical, fluctuating between absolute zero and the output of a supernova, as if the vessel existed in multiple states simultaneously. "Analysis," Valerius commanded, his own voice a bastion of calm in the rising tide of confusion on his bridge. The ship's sentience core struggled, its synthesized voice strained. "Unable to classify. The object does not adhere to known physics. Its mass, energy, and dimensional signature are paradoxical. It is here, but it is also elsewhere. It is ancient, but it is also new." Valerius watched the impossible object, his mind racing through protocols that had never been tested. This was not a rogue state or a pirate fleet. This was an unknown variable of existential magnitude. Open a channel. Standard greeting. All frequencies. Project the symbol of the Great Accord, a shimmering blue circle, the emblem of compact authority and peace, was projected across space. A friendly hand extended into the dark. The response, when it came, was not a signal. It was an inundation. Every communication system aboard the Luminous Mandate and its 300 sister ships screamed. It wasn't a hostile code or a jamming frequency. It was a deluge of pure, uncompressed culture. Valerius's mind was flooded with images of sun-drenched fields and towering cities of chrome and glass, the sound of 1,000 different symphonies playing at once, the taste of spices he had never known, the feeling of love and rage and sorrow so potent it threatened to shatter his disciplined consciousness. Equations that rewrote physics scrolled behind his eyes. Poetry that spoke of dying stars filled his ears. The entire history of a species poured into the fleet's network like an ocean breaking a dam. It was a broadcast, really, but it was also a memory, a soul laid bare. On the bridge, officers slumped in their chairs, overwhelmed, their cybernetic implant smoking. Regent Lyra was weeping, her 6 eyes streaming luminous fluid as she experienced the birth and death of a star from the perspective of a creature that had called it home. The compact systems, designed for the sterile exchange of data, were being destroyed by the sheer richness of the information. This was an attack more devastating than any plasma bolt. It was an assault of pure meaning. Valerius forced himself to stand, the alien emotions warring with his own ingrained logic. He severed his personal link to the ship's network, the sudden silence in his mind a jarring emptiness. "Purge the systems," he roared. "Quarantine the network. That is not a greeting. It is a weapon, an ontological contagion, deep within the pearlescent Arcship Odyssey." Dr. Eris Thorne watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of dread. She stood in the Chamber of Echoes, the ship's central archive, a cavernous space where luminous threads of data formed shifting constellations, each one a life, a story, a moment from a history she had spent her own long life curating. The Odyssey was not a warship. It was a refuge, a seed of a civilization that had fled a dying galaxy eons ago, making the slow, silent journey between cosmic shores. They were explorers, archivists, dreamers. Eris's role was to prepare for this day, the day of reemergence, when they would find a new home and share their story with whomever they found. She had imagined a cautious meeting, a slow exchange of languages and philosophies, a dance of diplomacy. She had not imagined this. The broadcast was sent as you configured, archivist. A calm, disembodied voice echoed through the chamber. It was the ship's consciousness, the integrated mind of millions of its former inhabitants, now its gentle custodian, a gesture of pure goodwill. Our complete history, our art, our science, an offering of peace. Eris watched the holographic projection before her. It showed the compact fleet, the elegant silver ships now floating aimlessly, their systems in chaos. "They were not ready," she whispered, her heart aching. "Their minds are too ordered, too rigid. We overwhelmed them." She was a small woman, with pale skin that had never known a natural sun and eyes the color of a twilight sky, filled with the inherited weariness of 1,000,000,000 souls. Her people had evolved during their long journey, becoming one with their vessel. They had transcended the need for crude technologies, learning to shape reality the way their ancestors had shaped clay. The Odyssey itself was a living extension of their collective will, its reality-bending drive a manifestation of their shared consciousness. They had forgotten how to think small, how to be anything less than what they had become. A new alert chimed, and the projection shifted. The silver ships were recovering. Their chaotic energy signatures were stabilizing, coalescing into formations that spoke of aggression. Blue energy fields began to form around the Odyssey, a cage of crackling light. "They are deploying containment fields," the ship's voice stated, without inflection. "Their energy weapons are charging. They classify us as a threat. Eris felt a tremor run through the deck, not from an impact, but from the Odyssey itself, reacting to the hostile intent. The ship was a pacifist by design, but it was not defenseless. Its primary defense was its own nature. "They are afraid of us," Eris said softly. "They see our existence as a violation of their reality, and they intend to correct it." She had studied the histories of 1,000 extinct species. She knew how the story often ended. Fear begets violence. Violence begets extinction. She closed her eyes, placing a hand on the cool, humming wall of the chamber. "Do not harm them," she pleaded. "Show them they are in no danger." The voice of the Odyssey was serene. "Harm is a function of intent. We have no such intent. We will simply be outside, in the cold void." The compact's containment field closed in. It was a marvel of engineering, a sphere of compressed space-time designed to isolate and crush any anomaly. It was the final argument in any negotiation, the tool that had brought entire defiant worlds to heel. The field touched the hull of the Odyssey, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the blue energy of the containment field began to change. Its uniform color wavered, then broke apart into a kaleidoscope of hues. The ordered energy patterns unraveled, flowing across the Odyssey's surface like water, where they were absorbed and then re-emitted as a gentle, harmless aurora of shimmering light. Aboard the luminous Mandate, Valerius watched in disbelief. "Report, containment field failed," Regent Lyra stammered, her composure shattered. "The target, it's not resisting. It's harmonizing. It's rewriting the energy's fundamental properties. It treated the field as nourishment." Before Valerius could process this, the second wave of the compact's correction began. Hundreds of ships fired their disabling cannons, beams of disruptive energy designed to overload and shut down any technological system. The beams converged on the Odyssey, a storm of pure entropy. Eris felt the ship shudder, a gentle sigh that vibrated through her bones. The incoming energy was not blocked or deflected. The Odyssey simply expanded its own state of being, its paradoxical nature creating a buffer of indeterminate reality around its hull. The disabling beams entered this buffer and ceased to be weapons. Their energy was conserved, but their purpose was lost. They became inert photons, scattering harmlessly into space. The entire harmonious fleet, the instrument of galactic order, had thrown its full conventional power at the anomaly, and the anomaly had not even registered it as an attack. They were as children throwing stones at a mountain. A profound silence fell over the bridge of the luminous Mandate. The fleet floated, its primary offensive capabilities exhausted and proven useless. They were powerless, adrift before a being whose existence was beyond their comprehension. It was in that moment of absolute stillness that a true communication finally came from the Odyssey. It was not a cultural data blast that shattered the mind, but a single, clear voice, speaking the compact's primary dialect with perfect, unaccented fluency. The voice was calm, curious, and tinged with a faint, unmistakable sadness. It echoed across the bridge of every ship in the fleet, a question that cut deeper than any weapons. "Is this how you greet all travelers?" Eris Thorne stood in the Chamber of Echoes, watching the projection of the stunned and silent fleet. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had dreamed her entire life of this moment, of humanity rejoining the galactic community. But as she looked at the terrified faces of the aliens on the projection, she realized they hadn't just found a new galaxy. They had brought with them a new kind of power, a power that inspired not wonder, but fear. This was not the beginning of a new chapter of peace. It was the prelude to a war they had never wanted to fight, against an enemy who could not even begin to understand them. Their journey was over, but their struggle, she feared, had just begun. Prefect Valerius stood immobile on the bridge of the luminous mandate, the traveler's sorrowful question echoing in the silent chamber. The voice, so perfectly rendered in his own language, was a more profound violation than the cultural deluge had been. That had been a storm, chaotic and overwhelming. This was a scalpel, precise and unnerving, slipping past his defenses to expose the core of the Compact's doctrine. They were not greeters, they were guardians. They did not welcome the unknown. They categorized it, assessed it, and, if necessary, pacified it. The question implied a moral failing, an idea his logical mind struggled to process. Morality was a function of the Great Accord. What lay outside the Accord was not immoral, it was simply incorrect. "Regent Lyra," he said, his voice as cold and steady as the void outside. "Record the transmission. Designate the entity Anomaly Velatris 1. Log its vocal communication as a secondary form of mimetic incursion, likely intended to induce empathy and lower tactical readiness." His officers stared at him, their faces a mixture of residual shock and dawning respect for his unshakable composure. He was reimposing order on a situation that had defied it, translating the incomprehensible into the familiar lexicon of threat assessment. "All ships," he broadcast to the fleet, "execute tactical withdrawal pattern Epsilon. We will fall back to the perimeter of the nebula to reevaluate our containment strategy. Maintain full sensor locks on the anomaly. This is not a retreat. It is a recalibration." With disciplined precision, the 300 ships of the Harmonious Fleet turned as one, their engines flaring in a silent, coordinated ballet as they pulled away from the pearlescent vessel. It was a lie, of course. It was a retreat, a full-blown flight from a power they could not hope to challenge with the tools at their disposal, when the preservation of order, even the illusion of it, was paramount. As the last of the silver ships vanished into the swirling gas clouds, Valerius sent one final, encrypted message to the anomaly. "Your existence within Compact territory constitutes a violation of the Great Accord. You are unclassified, unsanctioned, and your energy profile exceeds all permissible limits, and you will maintain your current position and await auditing by a full conclave delegation. Any deviation will be interpreted as an act of aggression." It was a hollow threat, and he knew it. But protocol was the shield against chaos, and he would uphold it even as reality crumbled around him. Inside the Odyssey, Eris Thorn watched the fleet depart. The ship's consciousness filled the chamber with a feeling of gentle curiosity, devoid of the fear or anger a human might have felt. "Their message is a paradox," the voice observed. "They command us to remain stationary while simultaneously acknowledging they lack the means to enforce their command." Eris sighed, running a hand through her silver hair. "It's not about enforcement. It's about control. They are trying to fit us into a box, to put a label on us so we stop being frightening. Anomaly Velatris 1. She let the sterile designation hang in the air. "After all, we showed them our art, our music, the birth of our son, the love of a trillion lives. That is what we are to them. An error to be corrected." A wave of profound loneliness washed over her, an ancient echo from the billions of souls whose memories she curated. They had crossed the unimaginable gulf between galaxies, only to find a new form of emptiness. Not the emptiness of the void, but the emptiness of a mind closed to wonder. "They will not listen to our history," she said, prior to herself then to the ship. So we must give them a person. She walked to the center of the Chamber of Echoes, where a single beam of soft light illuminated a dais. "Project me," she commanded. "Not as a thought, not as a memory. As a form. The form my ancestors wore. Simple, biological, non-threatening. Transmitted to their flagship." The Odyssey hesitated, a rare occurrence. "Archivist, to reduce your presence to a single, localized projection is to lie. It misrepresents the fundamental nature of our being. It is not a lie. It is a translation." Eris countered. "We tried to show them the entire library at once. Now, we will show them a single page." In the void where the compact fleet had been, a new light flickered into existence. It was a hologram, but one of superior fidelity, projected across millions of kilometers of space. It depicted a woman, small and unassuming, with intelligent eyes and a weary but gentle expression. The projection appeared on the main view screen of the luminous Mandate, just as Valerius was preparing to enter quantum slipstream. He stopped, his hand hovering over the console. The image was perfectly rendered, a stark contrast to the overwhelming force of their previous encounters. The woman spoke, her voice the same one from before, filled with a resonant sadness. "My name is Eris Thorn," she said, her gaze seeming to meet Valerius's directly across the impossible distance. "I am the archivist of the vessel you call an anomaly. We are human. We are refugees, the last remnants of a civilization from another galaxy. Our journey has been long, and we intended no offense. The information we sent was a gift, an introduction. We do not understand your laws, but we are not your enemies. We seek only a new home, a place to remember what we were." Valerius stared at the image, his mind a whirlwind of calculation. A refugee, a biological entity. It was a carefully constructed narrative, designed to disarm. He saw the subtle cues, the non-threatening posture, the direct but plaintive gaze, the use of a name to create a sense of individuality. It was a sophisticated tactic, but it did not change the fundamental truth. The vessel she represented was a weapon of unimaginable power, whether she admitted it or not. Its very existence shattered the foundations of their peace. He could not afford empathy. He would not. "Maintain course," he ordered the helm, his voice flat. "The anomaly is attempting to engage in diplomacy. It is irrelevant." He turned his back on the projection of Eris Thorn and activated the slipstream drive. The stars outside the viewport warped and stretched into lines of light, and the luminous Mandate vanished, leaving Eris's lonely image to fade into the nebula's glow. His destination was Cygnus X1, the heart of the compact, a trinary star system where the three central suns were orbited not by planets, but by a Dyson sphere of incomprehensible scale known as the Silent Nexus. It was the seat of the conclave, the disembodied intelligence that governed the compact, a collective of the greatest minds of their history. Their consciousness preserved in a quantum computer the size of a solar system. As his ship traveled, Valerius prepared his report. He methodically detailed the anomaly's appearance, its energy profile that defied physics, its effortless neutralization of their fleet's power, and its two forms of communication, the overwhelming mimetic payload and the subsequent targeted emotional appeal. He framed it not as a military defeat, but as a philosophical crisis. The Great Accord was predicated on the idea that certain technologies were inherently destabilizing and must be forbidden. The anomaly was a living refutation of that principle. It wielded powers they had deemed impossible, yet it claimed to be peaceful. This was the most dangerous idea of all. If such power could be wielded without collapsing into chaos, than the entire 10,000-year history of the compact. Its laws, its sacrifices, its very purpose was built on a flawed premise. The anomaly did not need to fire a shot to destroy them. It only had to exist. The luminous mandate emerged from slipstream into the blinding light of the silent nexus. The inner surface of the Dyson sphere was a seamless, featureless white, a canvas of pure information. Valerius transferred his consciousness directly into the nexus, his physical body remaining in a command trance on the bridge. Here, in the data realm, thought was motion. He presented his report not as words, but as a pure sensory and data stream, allowing the conclave to experience the encounter as he had. He felt their collective intellect focus on his memories, the peeling back of reality, the baffling energy readings, the failure of the containment field, the deluge of alien art and science, and finally, the face of the woman named Eris Thorne. The response from the conclave was not a voice, but a wave of pure cold logic that washed over his own consciousness. Valerius felt a chill. Even in his disembodied state, he had expected a debate, a delegation, a century of study. But the conclave's logic was absolute and terrifyingly swift. The conclave continued. Therefore, it must be removed. Valerius projected a flicker of what could almost be called apprehension in his thoughts. The conclave's reply was stark, resonating with the weight of a decision made only once before in the compact's entire history. A new stream of data flooded Valerius's consciousness, a protocol so deeply buried in the compact's archives that it was regarded as myth. It was called the Anathema Protocol. It was not a weapon in the conventional sense. It did not fire a beam or launch a projectile. It was a device that targeted the timeline itself. It did not destroy an object. It erased its entire history, plucking its thread from the tapestry of causality so that it had never existed at all. The side effects were catastrophic and unpredictable, creating paradoxes and temporal shockwaves that could unravel entire star systems. It was the compact's final, most terrible secret, a weapon designed to fight gods. The conclave concluded. Valerius's consciousness returned to his body with a jolt. The weight of his physical form felt immense. A sudden burden. He had come to the Nexus seeking guidance and had been handed a death sentence for an entire civilization, a command to commit an act of deicidal reality-warping violence. He looked out at the tranquil, ordered perfection of the Nexus and felt nothing. The logic was inescapable. The threat was absolute. The solution was final. He gave the new coordinates to his helm officer, his voice betraying no emotion. Set a course for Kytos. Maximum speed. Back in the Velatris Nebula, Eris Thorne stood within the quiet hum of the Odyssey. For days, she had held her projected image in the void, a lonely vigil, hoping for a response that never came. As she finally let the projection fade, the ship's consciousness alerted her to a new phenomenon. It was not a ship or an energy reading. It was something far more subtle, a faint, discordant vibration in the rhythm of time, ripple in the flow of cause and effect, emanating from a distant point in the galaxy. What is it? She asked, a sense of deep unease settling over her. They are not preparing a fleet. The Odyssey replied, its serene voice now laced with a trace of something Eris had never heard before concern. They are preparing to edit reality. The ghost star of Kytos did not shine. It consumed. It was a black dwarf, the final cinder of a star that had died before the compact civilization had even learned to shape tools. It was a corpse of degenerate matter so dense that it warped the space around it into a permanent gravitational lens, bending the light of distant galaxies into distorted, ghostly coronas. It was here, in this graveyard of light and time, that the Compact had built its greatest and most terrible secret. The Anathema engine was not a ship or a station. It was a cage built around the dead star, a web of black, crystalline structures, kilometers in diameter, that drew their impossible power from the star's quantum decay. There were no lights, no docking bays, no signs of life. The structure seemed to absorb energy, its surface a perfect absolute zero that felt like a hole in the universe. As the luminous mandate approached, its sophisticated system struggled to get a coherent reading, as if the engine existed in a state of perpetual quantum uncertainty. Valerius felt the wrongness of the place in his bones, a deep, primal revulsion that his logical mind could not suppress. This was a place where the laws of physics came to be executed. He transferred his command to his second, then took a small shuttle into the heart of the web. The interior of the Anathema engine was a cathedral of silence. Vast, empty chambers were lined with the same light-devouring material, the geometry of the halls subtly non-Euclidean, turning in on itself in ways that made his optical sensors ache. At its center was the calibration throne, a single, isolated seat suspended in a vacuum, surrounded by humming crystalline pylons that pulsed with a cold, internal darkness. This was the weapon's focusing lens, and he was to be its operator, as the throne's interface arms, thin as surgical needles, connected to the ports on his neck and spine. He felt a coldness spread through his consciousness that had nothing to do with temperature. He was linking his mind to a machine that did not process data but erased it from existence. The conclave's voice echoed in his mind, stripped of all inflection, a pure directive. Valerius closed his eyes, and the universe dissolved. He was back in the Velatris Nebula. He saw it all again, not as a memory, but as a lived experience, amplified and sharpened by the engine's power. He saw reality peel back, felt the awe and terror of the Odyssey's arrival. The engine fed on his emotions, translating his fear of the unknown into targeting parameters. He felt the overwhelming wave of the cultural broadcast, the alien art and music and love and pain. And the engine interpreted this richness as a contagion, a chaotic variable that must be eliminated. He saw his fleet's weapons rendered useless, his containment fields consumed, and the engine registered this as an act of supreme defiance against order, marking the Odyssey for absolute negation. The process was agonizing. He was being used as a template for cosmic annihilation, his own mind providing the justification for the act. But he did not waver. This was his duty. The chaos of the anomaly was a cancer on the placid certainty of the galaxy. And he was the surgeon's blade. Aboard the Odyssey, the ship and its archivist were working desperately. The temporal distortion emanating from the Katos system was growing stronger, its frequency becoming more defined. It was like a sound tuning itself, finding the precise note it needed to shatter a specific crystal. And that crystal, Eris realized with dawning horror, was them. "It's a weapon that targets causality," she whispered, her voice trembling as she watched the data threads in the Chamber of Echoes flicker and fray. "It's not meant to destroy us in the present. It's meant to ensure we never existed at all." The ship's consciousness replied, its voice for the first time holding a tone of urgency. "The weapon is being calibrated. It is locking onto our unique temporal signature. The focal point of the calibration is a single biological consciousness, the one you name Prefect Valerius." Eris felt a sudden, chilling insight. They weren't just targeting the ship. They were targeting a memory of the ship. Valerius's memory. "He is reliving our first contact," she said. "They are using his experience, his fear, to aim." She looked around the Chamber of Echoes. at the constellations of 1 billion lives, the history of a people who had survived the death of a galaxy. All of it was about to be undone, reduced to a paradox, a ghost story that was never even told. They could not flee. The weapon was not aimed at a location in space, but at a location in time. Wherever they went, it would find their past and erase it. They could not fight it with energy or matter. "How do you shoot an idea if we cannot change the weapon?" she said, her voice hardening with resolve. "Then we must change the memory that guides it." Archivist, such an intervention would be intimate, the Odyssey cautioned. To enter another's mind is the gravest of trespasses. To allow our entire history to be erased for a crime we did not commit is a greater one, Eris retorted. They refuse to see our library, so I will take a single book to them, to him, prepare to project my consciousness, not into space, but into the attunement stream, find a seam in his memory, and I will slip through. It was an act of impossible delicacy, like performing surgery on a soul from across a galaxy. The Odyssey focused its immense reality-bending power, not outward to warp space, but inward to a single point, the consciousness of Prefect Valerius, suspended within the cold heart of the anathema engine. Valerius was at the apex of his memory. The moment he had rejected Eris's holographic plea, he felt the cold satisfaction of his decision, the rightness of choosing order over a seductive lie. The engine seized on this feeling, the final lock in its targeting sequence. The pylons around him began to glow with a light that was the color of absence, and a low, resonant hum vibrated through his very atoms. The anathema protocol was armed. And then the memory wavered. Something was wrong. Standing there, on the bridge of his memory ship, was a figure that did not belong. It was the woman, Eris Thorne, not as a hologram, but as a solid, present being, her sad eyes looking not at a view screen, but directly at him. "Prefect Valerius," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the engine's rising hum. "What are you doing?" Valerius recoiled, a gasp catching in his throat. This was impossible. The engine was a closed system. "You are not real," he stated, his voice a weapon against the intrusion. "You are a psychic echo, a last defense." "I am as real as the memory you are using to kill my people," she replied, taking a step closer. The sterile bridge of the luminous mandate seemed to soften around her, the hard lines blurring. "The Conclave told you we are a threat to your reality. They did not tell you why we are what we are." Before he could respond, she reached out, not with her hand, but with her mind, and the memory of the bridge dissolved. Valerius found himself standing under a dying, bloated red sun. The sky was the color of rust. The ground was cracked and barren, littered with the ruins of crystalline cities that had crumbled to dust eons ago. He felt a wind that carried the taste of ancient sorrow. "This was our home galaxy," Eris's voice explained, echoing around him. "We did not choose our power, Prefect. We were forged by it. Our universe was unstable. Its laws were fluid, its constant shifting. It was a place of infinite creation, but also infinite destruction. To survive, we had to learn to adapt, to think in ways your people have forbidden. We learned to stabilize reality with our minds, to navigate the currents of causality, to build a ship that was not just a machine, but a lifeboat for existence itself." The scene shifted. He was inside the Odyssey, but not as an intruder. He was a welcome guest. He saw the trillions of consciousness, stored not as data, but as light, as music, as art. He felt their collective peace, their weariness, their profound, unending dream of finding a quiet place to rest. He felt their lack of malice, their absence of ambition. They did not seek to conquer or convert. They only sought to be. "You see power, and you assume it must be a weapon," Eris continued, her form coalescing beside him again. "Because for your people, that is all it has ever been. You have spent 10,000 years enforcing a single, very rigid definition of reality because you are terrified of what lies outside of it. You call it peace, but it is a cage, and you are willing to destroy a history 1,000,000,000 years deep, not because we are a threat, but because we are proof that your cage is not the only way to live." The hum of the anathema engine was screaming in his mind now, a furious, insistent command to complete the sequence, to erase this beautiful, terrifying truth she was showing him. The Conclave's logic was a fortress around his thoughts. They are chaos. They are the error. Order must be preserved. But Eris's logic was a seed, planted in the crack of his certainty. Is a peace that requires such a monstrous act truly peace? He was torn between two realities: the cold, perfect order of the compact, and the messy, vibrant, tragic beauty of the travelers. The engine demanded a choice. The causal anchor was set. The pylons flared, the darkness within them concentrating into a single point of anti-creation. The conclave commanded, its voice the weight of a galaxy. Valerius looked at the memory of Eris Thorn, at the kindness in her ancient eyes, and for the first time in his life, he hesitated. The anathema engine, poised to unmake history, waited on the conviction of a single, fractured mind. The hesitation lasted for less than a nanosecond, but in the quantum realm of the anathema engine, it was an eternity. The machine, designed for the absolute certainty of its operator, faltered. The focused point of anti-creation wavered, its perfect coherence disrupted by the seed of doubt Eris had planted in Valerius's mind. The conclave's command, "Benfoy," echoed against the newfound walls of his uncertainty and broke like a wave against a stone. He was seeing two truths at once: the compact's doctrine that the unknown was a threat to be neutralized, and the human's plea that the unknown could be a wonder to be understood. For the first time, he saw the Great Accord not as a universal law, but as a choice to value safety over discovery, stasis over evolution. And he saw the anathema protocol for what it was, not a tool of justice, but the ultimate expression of fear. "No," he whispered, the single word a cataclysm in the silent heart of the machine. The engine reacted to his denial with a violent shudder. Alarms that had been silent for millennia shrieked through his consciousness. The contained anti-creation, denied its target, began to destabilize. The black pylons around him cracked, leaking threads of pure temporal paradox into the chamber. Time was unraveling, not just in his mind, but in the physical reality of the engine. The conclave's presence in his mind became a furious storm, but Valerius had disconnected himself from their command. He was no longer their instrument. He was a being making a choice. He looked at the projection of Eris in his mind, her image flickering as the engine tore itself apart around them. "Your history will not end today," he said to her, a promise that was also a verdict upon himself. With a final, desperate act of will, he turned the full force of his consciousness against the machine that held him. He did not try to control it. He did not try to shut it down. He embraced the doubt, the chaos, the humanity she had shown him, and poured it into the engine's core logic. He gave the machine of absolute certainty the one thing it could not compute: a paradox of the soul. The anathema engine, unable to resolve the conflict between its programming and its operator's will, did the only thing it could. It turned its power inward. A silent, blinding flash of non-light erupted from the ghost star of Ketos. The web of crystalline structures did not explode. They simply ceased to have ever been. The energy of the blast was not thermal or kinetic. It was causal. A shockwave of pure temporal static ripped through the system, erasing the anathema engine from the timeline as cleanly as it would have erased the Odyssey. The luminous mandate, holding a safe position at the edge of the Kaito system, was rocked by a wave of vertigo. For a moment, every system on the ship reported that it was in two places at once, that its own history was flickering. Then, reality settled, like a disturbed pool of water finding its level. The anathema engine was gone. Not just destroyed, but absent from all records, from all memory, except for one. Aboard the shuttle docked with the now non-existent structure, Prefect Valerius was thrown back into his physical body. The link to the engine was severed, the psychic scream of its self-erasure echoing in his skull. He was alive, but he was changed. The rigid certainty that had defined him was shattered, replaced by a vast, aching emptiness filled with the ghost of 1 billion years of someone else's history. He was no longer just a prefect of the compact. He was a man who had looked into the heart of a god-killer and chosen mercy. The temporal shockwave did not stop at the Keto system. It expanded at the speed of thought, a ripple of uncertainty spreading through the galaxy. Its primary effect was subtle but profound. It weakened the fundamental constants that the compact had spent 10,000 years reinforcing. The cage had been rattled. Across the spiral arm, forbidden technologies that had been suppressed for millennia began to stir. On a quarantined world, a dormant gray goo plague felt the loosening of its quantum shackles and began to replicate. In a forgotten nebula, a race of pure energy beings, imprisoned in a Dyson sphere, found the frequency of their prison wavering. The carefully curated piece of the compact was beginning to fray at the edges, all because one man had dared to doubt. On the Odyssey, Eris Thorne was ripped from her psychic projection with a violent jolt. She collapsed in the Chamber of Echoes, the feedback from the engine's destruction overloading her senses. The ship's consciousness surrounded her with a calming field, its serene voice filled with an uncharacteristic awe. "He did it! The prefect! He chose not to fire! He broke the weapon!" Eris got to her feet, her body aching. "He did more than that," she said, looking at the star map. 1,000 new lights were appearing, alerts and warnings from across the compact's territory. He broke their control. She felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by a cold dread. Valerius had saved them, but he may have doomed his own people in the process. The chaos they had held at bay for so long was stirring. The very stability they had built their civilization on was now compromised. The compact would interpret this not as an act of mercy, but as an attack of unprecedented scale. They would see Valerius's choice and her influence as the ultimate mimetic contagion. They would no longer seek to erase the Odyssey. They would seek to destroy it with every conventional means at their disposal. The harmonious fleet was vast. They had lost their ultimate weapon, but they still had millions of ships, trillions of soldiers. Now, they had a reason to unite in fear and righteous anger. "They are coming," the Odyssey stated, its sensors picking up the faint signatures of thousands of slipstream drives converging on their position. Not just a patrol group, a crusade. Eris walked to the central dais, her expression hardening. Her people were pacifists, but they were also survivors. They had outlived a dying universe. They would not be extinguished by a fearful one. "For 10,000 years, this galaxy has slept," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of the billion souls she represented. "It is time for it to wake up." She placed her hand on the dais, and the Odyssey responded to her will. The pearlescent hull of the ship began to shift. The smooth, unbroken surface rippled, and new structures emerged, flowing into existence like liquid mercury. Weapon emplacements, not of metal and plasma, but of focused reality, bloomed like strange flowers. Emitters designed to project not energy, but ideas, formed along its spine. The ship was transforming from an ark into a warship, a vessel designed not to kill, but to change minds, by force if necessary. "We cannot run and we cannot hide," Eris declared. "They believe we are chaos. So we will show them what true creation looks like, plot a course for the heart of their empire. For Cygnus X1, the ship's voice was resolute. The silent nexus, their central intelligence. To go there is to invite total war. They have already declared it, Eris replied. They sent their greatest weapon to erase our story. Now, we will go and tell it to them in person, whether they want to listen or not. Meanwhile, Prefect Valerius returned to the luminous mandate. He strode on to the bridge, his presence silencing the confused chatter of his crew. They could see the change in him. The cold, crystalline logic in his eyes had been replaced by a fiery, human resolve. He was no longer a perfect instrument of the conclave. He was a variable they had not accounted for. "I have a new command," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that was entirely his own. His second-in-command stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. "Prefect, the Conclave has issued a fleet-wide directive. The anomaly is reclassified as an Omega-level hostile. All fleets are to converge and neutralize it. You are ordered to stand down and submit to a psychic audit." Valerius looked at the man, his oldest friend and colleague, and felt a pang of regret for the choice he was about to force upon him. "The Conclave is wrong," Valerius said simply. "They have allowed fear to override their logic. They would sterilize the galaxy of its wonders to maintain their illusion of control. I will not be a party to it." He turned to the helm. "Set a course for the Velatriz Nebula. We are going to render aid to the humans." A stunned silence fell over the bridge. This was not just disobedience. It was heresy. It was an act of open rebellion against the unquestionable authority of the Conclave. His second drew his energy sidearm, its hum a sharp note of dissent in the tense air. "Prefect, I cannot allow you to do this. You are compromised. The anomaly has infected your mind." Valerius did not look at him. He looked at the faces of his crew, at the men and women who had followed him for centuries, who had trusted his judgment without question. He had to trust that he had taught them to be more than just cogs in a machine. "I have never been more clear in my mind," he said. "For 10,000 years, we have served the cause of peace. Today, we have a choice. We can continue to serve the silence of the cage, or we can fight for the messy, unpredictable, beautiful chaos of a living galaxy. I have made my choice. Now you must make yours." The hum of the sidearm wavered. The second-in-command looked from his weapon to the unwavering resolve in his prefect's eyes, and a lifetime of certainty began to crumble. The hum of the sidearm was the only sound on the bridge of the luminous mandate, a thin, sharp note of defiance against Valerius's heresy. His second-in-command, Lyson, held the weapon steady, his face a mask of anguish. He was a creature of the Great Accord, and his prefect, the man he had revered for centuries, had just declared war on its very soul. Valerius did not move. He met Lyson's gaze, not with a command, but with a silent plea for understanding. "They offered us their entire history as a gift. Lyson," Valerius said, his voice quiet but resonant. "We answered with a weapon that erases history. Ask yourself, who is the true agent of chaos here?" He then turned his back on the weapon, a gesture of ultimate trust or ultimate folly, and faced the main viewport. "Set the course," he repeated to the helm officer. For a long moment, the only movement was the trembling of Lycan's hand. Then, with a soft click, the energy weapon was deactivated. "You heard the prefect," Lycan growled, his voice thick with emotion as he holstered the sidearm. "Take us to the nebula. May the spirits of the Nexus forgive us all." A wave of relief and renewed purpose swept through the bridge. One by one, the officers turned back to their stations, their movements crisp and efficient. They were no longer just a fleet. They were a rebellion. As they raced toward the Vela Tris Nebula, the Odyssey was already gone. In its place, the ship's consciousness had left a single, clear message on a looping quantum channel. "We go to the heart of the matter." Valerius knew instantly what it meant. Cygnus X1, the silent nexus. It was not a retreat. It was an escalation of unimaginable audacity. "They're not running," Valerius breathed, a slow, grim smile touching his lips. "They're taking the argument to the source." He altered course immediately, pushing his ship's slipstream drive to its breaking point. His small patrol group of 300 ships was a pittance against the full might of the Harmonious Fleet, or what he knew his role was not to win a battle of attrition. It was to bear witness, and if necessary, and to buy time. The Odyssey emerged into the blinding white light of the silent Nexus. Before it stood not a fleet, but a wall. Tens of thousands of compact warships, a perfect geometric formation of silver hulls and blazing energy fields, stood between the human ark and the Dyson sphere. It was the full, terrifying might of the Compact's military doctrine, overwhelming, ordered, and absolute. A single voice. The cold, collective mind of the conclave, broadcast across all frequencies. Eris stood on the newly formed command deck of the Odyssey, her calm expression a stark contrast to the apocalyptic scene outside. "They still think this is about power," she murmured. The ship hummed in response, its reality-bending emitters glowing with a soft, pearlescent light. "They are about to learn that some things are more powerful than force." The battle began not with a salvo, but with a song. The Odyssey projected a wave of energy that was not destructive, but transformative. It was a complex harmony of frequencies that resonated with the base code of the Compact's shield technology. The first rank of compact ships saw their impenetrable energy shields waver, then dissolve, not into nothing, but into vast, harmless clouds of iridescent, fractal light patterns. The Compact fired back, a storm of thousands of plasma beams converging on the lone ship. The Odyssey did not dodge. It met the onslaught with a localized distortion of space-time. The beams of energy bent, twisted, and tied themselves into knots. Their destructive power turned inward until they collapsed into brief, brilliant bursts of harmless radiation. It was not a fight. It was a lecture in theoretical physics, delivered at the speed of light. It was then that Valerius and his 300 ships arrived, emerging from slipstream at the flank of the Harmonious Fleet. They did not fire. Instead, Valerius broadcast on the Compact's command frequency, his voice ringing with the clarity of his conviction. "I am Prefect Valerius. The Conclave has lied. The humans are not a contagion. They are a possibility, a new way. I urge you all, look past your fear and see the truth." His message caused a ripple of confusion through the fleet, but the Conclave's control was absolute. A wing of 1,000 destroyers broke from the main formation and turned on Valerius's ships, their intent clear to silence the dissenting voice. "So be it," Valerius said grimly. "Hold the line. Buy them time." His small fleet met the charge, not with the hope of victory, but with the certainty of purpose. It was a desperate, beautiful, and doomed stand. Aboard the Odyssey, Eris knew her moment had come. Valerius was giving her the opening she needed. "His sacrifice cannot be in vain," she told the ship. "The only way to end this is to speak to the mind behind the guns. Take me in." The ship focused its power. A single thin beam of pearlescent light shot from its bow, bypassing the fleets and the energy fields, and struck the white surface of the silent nexus. It was not an attack, but an interface. Eris Thorn cast her consciousness across the beam, plunging into the quantum mind of the conclave. She found herself in an infinite, featureless white space, the data realm she had glimpsed through Valerius. Before her stood a towering, monolithic presence, the conclave, a being of pure, dispassionate logic. It stated why. Its voice the sound of grinding galaxies. "The equation is incomplete," Eris replied, her own form a small but defiant point of color in the stark white void. She did not argue or plead. She opened her mind and released everything she was, everything she protected. It was the broadcast from their first encounter, but focused, personalized, and aimed at the heart of the Nexus. The conclave was inundated with the feeling of a child's first laugh, the taste of rain on a dusty field, the heart-stopping beauty of a supernova seen from a lover's arms, the quiet dignity of an old man dying peacefully, the defiant scream of a species facing extinction. She showed them the messy, contradictory, illogical, and unbearably precious tapestry of a billion years of life. For a machine built on absolute logic, it was poison, the conclave insisted, but its form wavered. Cracks of color, of emotion, of paradox began to spiderweb across its perfect white surface. "They are the variables of life," Eris corrected gently. "You have built a galaxy without meaning, a perfect cage with nothing inside. That is not order. It is emptiness." She pressed harder, sharing with it the final memory of her own long-dead race, the choice they made not to fight the death of their universe, but to gather its stories and carry them into the next, a final act of selfless love. The monolithic form of the conclave groaned, the sound of a breaking mountain. The fortress of pure logic could not compute the variable of sacrifice. It shattered. The single unified voice broke apart into a million individual points of light, the original consciousnesses from which it had been formed, now freed from their cold union. The reign of the silent nexus was over. In the space outside, the effect was instantaneous. The harmonious fleet, its central command, suddenly silenced, faltered. Ships stopped firing, their formations dissolving into confusion. The wing that was annihilating Valerius's forces hesitated, their purpose gone. The war had ended not with a bang, but with a thought. As the last of his ships vented its atmosphere around him, Valerius watched the battle cease. His duty fulfilled, he had held the line. Weeks later, the galaxy was a different place. It was louder, messier, and infinitely more alive. The compact was fractured, its component species now forced to engage in the chaotic art of true diplomacy. The dormant threats awakened by the anathema engine's fall were real, and new conflicts were already flaring. But it was a living galaxy, not a curated museum, and the Odyssey drifted in orbit of a new, terraformed world, a new Earth, its people finally at rest. Eris stood on a green hillside under a warm yellow sun, watching children of a dozen different refugee species play together. She was no longer just an archivist, she was a founder, far away, At the edge of explored space, the battered hull of the luminous Mandate charted a course into the unknown. Prefect Valerius, now simply Valerius, stood on his bridge, watching the swirling colors of an uncharted nebula. His crew was a mixture of his original followers and aliens who had been drawn to his rebellion. He was no longer an enforcer of boundaries, but an explorer of them. The silence of the void had been broken, replaced by a symphony of infinite, unpredictable voices. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of wonder. Humanity had not come to conquer the galaxy. It had come to remind it how to dream.